London. Borough Market. Millionaire James Hartwell sees a flower vendor who is identical to his ex-wife, who died 5 years ago in a car crash. Same face, same eyes, same voice. "You're just like her," he whispers in shock. But when he discovers who this woman really is, the truth that emerges will destroy everything he believed about his wife's death. Incredible. Borough Market, London. The historic market bustled with life under the grey October morning sky, with Victorian iron and glass architecture framing stalls of fresh flowers, artisanal cheeses, and organic produce. The air smelled of fresh roses, Earl Grey tea from the nearby cafe, and that particular mixture of Thames mist and London energy that made the city unique. James Hartwell, 42, moved through the crowd with the distracted elegance of someone accustomed to luxury, but who had forgotten how to enjoy it. His Savile Row suit contrasted with the market's working-class atmosphere, but he seemed oblivious. Since losing Elizabeth 5 years ago, he'd wandered through London like a ghost searching for something he couldn't define. Hartwell Holdings, his financial empire, practically ran itself now. His assistants handled everything, whilst he spent his days walking aimlessly through London, trying to fill the void Elizabeth had left in his chest. That morning he'd stopped at the market to buy roses. Elizabeth had adored them. White English roses like those in her grandmother's garden in the Cotswolds. It had become a melancholy ritual, a way of keeping her close. He approached the most attractive flower stall, where perfect arrangements of roses, lilies, and daffodils bloomed under the market's glass roof. But when he looked up at the vendor, the world stopped. His blood froze. "Good morning. What can I get you?" The voice was identical. Every inflection, every musical note he'd loved and hadn't heard for 5 years. James couldn't respond. He stared at the girl's face as if he'd seen a ghost, because that's exactly how he felt. The chestnut hair pulled back in a low bun, the green eyes that sparkled with that particular light that had made James fall in love with Elizabeth at first sight. The lips with the same gentle smile, the delicate line of her jaw, even the small mole near her left ear. "Sir, are you all right?" The girl looked at him with concern, and even this was identical to how Elizabeth tilted her head when she worried about him. You're just like her," James whispered, his voice broken by emotion. The girl looked confused. "I'm sorry? I don't understand." James shook his head, trying to recover. "Forgive me. It's just, you look incredibly like someone I knew. It's truly extraordinary." "Happens quite often," the girl said with an understanding smile. "They say we all have a double somewhere in the world." "No," James shook his head firmly. "This isn't a simple resemblance. It's like looking at the same person." The girl observed him carefully, and for a moment James had the feeling she too had recognized something in him. "What's your name?" James asked, his heart pounding frantically. "Rose," she replied. "Rose Mitchell." Mitchell, not Hartwell. But the face, the voice, every gesture was Elizabeth's. "The roses," James said mechanically. "I'd like a dozen white roses." Whilst Rose selected the flowers, James couldn't take his eyes off her. It was as if Elizabeth had returned, as if those years of pain had been just a nightmare. "Here you are," Rose said, handing him the bouquet. "That's £20. James gave her a £50 note. "Keep the change." "But that's too much." "It doesn't matter." James turned to leave, then stopped. "Rose, do you work here every day?" "Monday through Saturday, 7 till 3. James nodded and walked away, but each step required enormous effort. He turned once to look at her, and Rose was still watching in his direction, a thoughtful expression on her face. That night, James couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Rose's face, hearing her voice. It was as if Elizabeth had returned to torment him, to remind him of everything he'd lost. The next day he returned to the market. Over the following days, James returned to the market each morning. He bought flowers he didn't display, plants he gave to his building's concierge, just to have an excuse to talk to Rose. "More white roses?" she asked on the fourth day, with an amused smile. "White roses were my wife's favorite," James said, surprising himself with this confession. "Your wife has excellent taste," Rose replied. "These come directly from Kent, from the same grower for 30 years. "My wife was from Kent," James whispered. "From Canterbury." Rose stopped, her hands still on the flowers. "I'm from Canterbury, too." James's world tilted again. "Really?" "I came to London 5 years ago to start fresh." 5 years ago. Exactly when Elizabeth had died. "What an extraordinary coincidence," James murmured. In the following days, their conversations grew longer. James discovered that Rose had lost her memory in a car accident 5 years earlier. She remembered nothing of her previous life, only confused fragments. A London family had found her in hospital without documents and had taken her in, giving her the surname Mitchell. The doctors said the amnesia was complete, Rose explained whilst arranging the daffodils. "Sometimes I have flashes, images I can't connect. A cottage with a garden full of white roses, a dark-haired man who smiles at me, the scent of lavender. But then they fade." James felt his heart stop. Elizabeth's cottage in the Cotswolds was surrounded by white roses and lavender, and he had dark hair. "Rose," he said with a trembling voice, "what date was your accident?" "The 15th of March, 2019. "Why?" "The 15th of March, 2019. The day Elizabeth had died." James stepped away from the stall with the excuse of an urgent call, but actually he needed air. His head was spinning, his heart beating so hard he thought he might faint. It was impossible. Elizabeth had died. He'd seen the body, organized the funeral, cried over her grave for 5 years. But Rose. That night, James called the private investigator he'd used for some business investigations. "I need you to investigate someone," he said. "Her name is Rose Mitchell. She works at Borough Market. I want to know everything about her. Everything." The investigator, Detective Inspector retired Michael Barnes, was a former Scotland Yard officer with 40 years of experience. If there was something to discover, he'd find it. 3 days later, he called James with information that chilled his blood. "I've got news about Mitchell," Barnes said. "It's a strange story, Mr. Hartwell. The girl was found on the 16th of March, 2019, at St. Thomas's Hospital in critical condition. No documents, no memory, no relatives looking for her." "Continue," James said, his mouth dry. "The Mitchells are a family of flower traders, decent people, but let's say they don't ask too many questions. They registered her as their adopted daughter without going through official social services, all handled under the table. And before the 16th of March? Nothing. It's as if she never existed. But Mr. Hartwell, there's something more. I've reviewed the traffic accident records from those days. On the 15th of March, 2019, on the M20 between Canterbury and London, there was a fatal accident. A Range Rover Evoque left the carriageway. Elizabeth's Range Rover. The driver's body was never completely identified, Barnes continued. The documents said Elizabeth Hartwell, but the body was, let's say, identification was based mainly on the documents found in the car. James felt breathless. "Are you saying that—" "I'm saying you should have a DNA test done, Mr. Hartwell. as soon as possible. That night, James went to the market at closing time. Rose was packing empty boxes when she saw him approaching. "James, is everything all right? You look disturbed." Even this was identical to Elizabeth, the ability to read his emotions with one look. "Rose, I must ask you something important. And I know it will seem strange, but would you agree to have a DNA test?" Rose looked at him surprised. "A DNA test? But why?" "Because I think you might be my wife. Elizabeth Hartwell, who died 5 years ago in a traffic accident in Kent." Rose's face went pale. She leaned against the counter as if her legs could no longer support her. "It's impossible," she whispered. "I'm Rose Mitchell. My adoptive parents found you the day after my wife's accident. Without memory, without documents. Rose, you're identical to Elizabeth. Not just physically. The gestures, the voice, even the way you tilt your head when you're worried." Rose stared at him for long seconds, then whispered, "I've been having strange dreams lately. Since I met you, I dream of a white cottage with a rose garden, lavender scenting the night, and a man who tells me, 'I love you, darling.'" James felt breathless. Darling was his pet name for Elizabeth. "Let's do the test," Rose said with a firm voice. "I want to know the truth." The DNA test was done at a private clinic in Harley Street. Results would arrive in 48 hours, but for James they were the longest 48 hours of his life. Rose had agreed to see him each evening after the market closed. They walked through London, and James told her about their life together. With each story, Rose's eyes lit up with increasingly strong recognition. "You always took me to Primrose Hill at sunset," she said one evening, stopping suddenly. "You said that, from there, London looked like a painting by Turner." James looked at her, shocked. "How do you know that?" "I don't know. You just reminded me. It's as if your words awakened something that was buried." The night before the results, they were sitting in a pub near Covent Garden when Rose said something that broke down all of James's defenses. "Our first date was here, wasn't it?"
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
"You'd ordered a pint of bitter and I ordered a gin and tonic. But then we accidentally switched glasses and laughed for 10 minutes. James began to cry. He'd never told anyone that detail. "Elizabeth," he whispered, "it's really you." The next day, the results arrived. James and Rose were sitting in the doctor's office when he opened the envelope. "The test is positive," he said. "Mrs. Mitchell, you are genetically identical to Elizabeth Hartwell. There's no doubt." Rose covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. "Then it's true. I'm Elizabeth." James took her in his arms, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt whole. But their happiness was short-lived. "There's something else you need to know," the doctor said with a grave expression. "From the blood tests, we've detected traces of a very particular substance, an experimental drug used to selectively erase memory." James and Elizabeth looked at him shocked. "What does that mean?" Elizabeth asked. "It means your amnesia wasn't caused by the accident. Someone deliberately erased your memory." The room fell silent. Then James asked the question that had been burning in his throat for days. "Doctor, is it possible to fake someone's death?" "Depends on how many resources and connections you have. But yes, technically, it's possible." James felt cold rage growing inside him. "Someone staged my wife's death, erased her memory, and abandoned her in London without identity." "But who?" Elizabeth whispered. "Who could have done such a thing?" James knew exactly who. There was only one person who had so much to gain from Elizabeth's death, and who had the resources to orchestrate such a thing: his brother, Charles. Charles Hartwell had always lived in his older brother's shadow. Whilst James built a financial empire, Charles spent money and collected failures. The only thing keeping him afloat was his inherited share of Hartwell Holdings that was his by right. But 5 years earlier, Elizabeth had discovered that Charles was embezzling funds from the company. She was about to tell James when she died in the accident. With Elizabeth dead and James devastated by grief, Charles had become the de facto second-in-command of the company. He had access to everything, controlled everything. "We need to go to the police," Elizabeth said, as they sat in the drawing room of James's Belgravia townhouse. "No," James said, his eyes hard as steel. "First, I want proof, and I want to hear him confess." James called Detective Barnes and explained the situation. "I need you to watch my brother. Every move, every call, every meeting, and search every possible way to connect him to that clinic that produces the memory-erasing drug." Meanwhile, James and Elizabeth had to pretend she was still Rose Mitchell. If Charles discovered she was alive and had recovered her memory, he might try to eliminate her again. It was the most difficult period of their lives. Elizabeth had recovered many memories, but the forced cohabitation in secret was wearing them down. James wanted to shout to the world that his wife was alive, wanted to rebuild their life together, but he knew they had to be careful. A week later, Barnes called with devastating news. "I've got him, Mr. Hartwell. Charles met last night with Dr. Nigel Ashworth, the physician who developed the experimental drug for memory cancellation. I recorded everything." "What did they say?" Charles was agitated. He kept saying someone was asking questions about the accident from 5 years ago. Ashworth was reassuring him that Elizabeth would never fully recover her memory, that the drug had permanent effects. James felt his blood boil. "Anything else?" "Yes." Charles said one phrase I recorded clearly. "If that stupid cow Elizabeth hadn't discovered the money movements, we wouldn't have to worry about anything now. 5 years ago I solved the problem, and if necessary, I'll solve it again." It was the confession they needed. "Barnes, take everything to the Crown Prosecution Service. I want Charles arrested before tomorrow morning." But that night, Charles made the move James didn't expect. At 3 in the morning, the alarm in James's Belgravia house went off. Someone had forced entry. James and Elizabeth woke, startled to find Charles in their drawing room, with a gun in his hand and 2 armed men beside him. "Hello, big brother," Charles said with a cold smile. And "Hello, Elizabeth." Or should I say, Rose. Elizabeth grabbed James's arm, but he remained calm. He'd anticipated something like this might happen. "Charles," James said, "so it's true. You were the one who staged Elizabeth's death." "I was brilliant, wasn't I?" Charles laughed. "Ashworth's drug is marvelous. It selectively erases memories without leaving permanent brain damage. Elizabeth never knew what happened to her." "Why?" Elizabeth whispered. "Why did you do this to me?" "Because you were going to ruin everything," Charles exploded. "Those stupid account audits, your questions about money movements. You would have sent me to prison and destroyed the family." "You were stealing from the company," James said. Elizabeth was right. "I was taking what was rightfully mine. You always had everything. The company, success, the perfect wife. What did I have? Scraps." Charles raised the gun. "But now it's over. Elizabeth will really die this time, and you'll have another tragic accident." That's when the lights came on, and the house filled with armed police officers. "Armed police! Drop your weapons!" Charles looked around, shocked. "How?" Detective Barnes collaborated with the police, James said, standing slowly. Every one of your moves was followed, and this conversation was recorded. It's over, Charles. Charles's men immediately dropped their weapons, but Charles kept pointing the gun at Elizabeth. If I can't have it, no one can. James instinctively moved to protect Elizabeth, but it wasn't necessary. The police marksman was faster. Charles collapsed on the floor, wounded but alive. As they took him away, Charles shouted, "You should have left her dead, James. You would never have been safe." A year later, Charles was sentenced to 25 years in prison for kidnapping, attempted murder, and fraud. Dr. Ashworth received 15 years as an accomplice. James and Elizabeth renewed their wedding vows in an intimate ceremony in the Cotswolds, at the cottage with the rose garden and lavender. Elizabeth had recovered almost all her memories, and the few that remained they were reconstructing together, day by day. "Do you know what I've understood from all this?" Elizabeth said, as they watched the sunset from their garden. "What?" "That true love never dies. It can be buried, hidden, erased, but it always finds its way back home." James kissed her, savoring every second of their second chance. "I love you, darling. I love you too. Forever." Borough Market had lost its most beautiful flower vendor, but had given London one of the most incredible love stories in its ancient history. Sometimes fate uses the most unexpected disguises to reunite what belongs together. Has this story moved you? Has it made you believe that true love can overcome any obstacle, even the loss of memory? If you too believe that authentic love is indestructible, that justice always triumphs in the end, and that fate has mysterious ways of reuniting soulmates, give it a like and share this video. Tell us in the comments, do you believe love can survive anything? Have you ever had the feeling you'd already met someone before? Do you know stories of people who found each other again against all odds? Share your experiences, and let's get this message of hope to as many people as possible. Because sometimes the greatest love is born from the most difficult trials, and the heart always recognizes its other half, even when the mind has forgotten. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of true love and justice. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for stories that prove true love is immortal.